The story of Mutiny on the Bounty. Look at this beautiful ship. It is an example of beautiful 1700s shipping in Europe. It's full sails, it's tall masts. These ships were used to cross the oceans. It was a great time of British and European exploration all over the world. This story that we are going to do is a story about human hope, but also the extremes of human brutality. The story starts in England, where the British authorities decide that they need food for their slaves in Jamaica. Captain Cook, who more recently discovered the eastern coast of Australia and it was settled in 1788, also visited Tahiti, where he saw these amazing breadfruit plants. Breadfruit plants could create these massive breadfruits that could easily be used to cheaply feed the slaves in Jamaica. So they looked for a trustworthy man that they could send, and the man was Captain Bligh. Captain Bligh was given a ship called the Bounty and given a group of men, and they set off from Portsmouth in cold, rainy England. They travelled around the Cape of Good Hope in the southern tip of Africa, and they travelled through the, the Indian Ocean until eventually they reached the Pacific. They made their way towards Tahiti, and once they arrived there, the men couldn't believe their eyes. Canoes rowed out to them with fresh fish, beautiful fruit from the tropics. The men had never seen things like that. But what impressed them most was the beautiful beaches and the beautiful women. After months at sea where they had not seen a woman, the men couldn't believe their eyes. Their job there would be to grow these breadfruit trees until they were about 6 months old, and then they would put them back onto the ships and take them out to Jamaica. Captain Bligh made sure that all the men got breadfruit seeds and started planting them. But after they had watered the breadfruit trees every day, the men were bored and they started having parties with the locals and getting to know them better. And they got to know some of the girls much better. You can imagine after 6 months, some of these guys fell in love and even married some of these local Tahitian girls. Some of the girls were already pregnant after 6 months with the couple's first child. Captain Bligh, of course, being a man of his word and a good British officer, decided that all these new breadfruit trees had to be loaded onto the Bounty and they were bound for Jamaica. These men who now had new relationships decided there was no way they were leaving their new wives, so some of them tried to run away up into the mountains, but Captain Bligh gave the Marines an order to go and get these men back. They were arrested and brought to the beach, and usually at this time, British officers had the right to actually execute these men by firing squad. But Captain Bligh was a fair bit kinder. He decided to only give them a flogging. So a flogging back then meant you were tied to the mast of the ship, and then they would take a cat of nine tails, which is a whip with 9 ends, and at the end they had a little lead weight. Every time that the 9 whips would hit you, it would cut open your skin. And after you had your lashes, they would then get a bucket of salt water and pour it over your back to make sure that you did not get infections. So the salt water actually, even though it caused great pain, disinfected your wound. These men who were flogged were not happy with Captain Bligh at all. This is Captain Bligh in later years in his life. They sailed on their way to Jamaica. But these men were so unhappy with Captain Bligh, they decided they were going to take over. So one morning, Captain Bligh heard a knock on his door, and there were all the rebels, the men who wanted to run away. They grabbed Captain Bligh and said to him, "You are no longer in the command of the ship. We are taking it back to Tahiti to our wives." They realized that they would actually be killed by the British Navy if they killed an officer. So their leader, Fletcher Christian, who wasn't a Christian at all, decided that he would spare Captain Bligh's life. He gave Captain Bligh one of the lifeboats that could only seat 12 men. Captain Bligh got in, and then he said if any of the crewmen wanted to join him, they could. 13 guys wanted to join him, but there was only room for 11. So 2 of the guys who didn't want to join the mutiny had to stay behind on board. Of course, naturally, Captain Bligh, being a British officer, had to do his duty. There he was, sitting in the open ocean next to Tonga in a little open boat. This is actually a replica that did the whole journey that Captain Bligh had to do to get back to civilization. Captain Bligh had only a little bit of water, a little bit of food, no weapons except for a knife and a sword, but he also had his pocket watch. This man was a master navigator. With that pocket watch and the stars, he actually navigated his way back to civilization. Here's a map of this epic journey that he took. He was stuck here in Tonga, where they dropped him off, travelled out to Fiji, where they were attacked and almost killed. Then he travelled to Vanuatu, where when they tried to get water, cannibals almost got them and ate them. So he lost about 2 men there, and then he travelled to the Cape York Peninsula, where they were also attacked by some of the locals. Then to Thursday Island, and eventually he ended up here in West Timor, where he caught a ship back to England, where he then reported what had happened. This took him months to actually complete this voyage, and by this time, the mutineers were long gone. What did the mutineers do? Well, if you look at the green line here, this is the journey of Captain Bligh back to civilization. But the mutineers, of course, they went back to Tahiti. And of course, there was no captain to look after them, so very quickly they got drunk and they got into fight. One of the Tahitian men got into a fight with one of the crew members. The crew member pulled out a pistol and shot the Tahitian at point blank range. Of course, in Tahitian culture, you can't allow for someone to kill one of your family members and let them get away with it. So the Tahitian men started wearing their war gear and they were attacking the crew members. Some of the crew members decided to stay on Tahiti, but Fletcher Christian and his closest friends decided that they were going to take 6 of their Tahitian friends with them. So there were 6 men from European origin, 6 men from Tahitian origin, and 12 women who got back onto the Bounty. They sailed away and they tried to make it to Tongatabu, but in Tongatabu they were attacked by the Tongans who didn't want them there. They looked like trouble to them. So they sailed into the open ocean, and then, as their luck would have it, they discovered something that wasn't on the maps, Pitcairn Island. They realized that the British Navy could not find them on a place that wasn't on the maps. So they beached the ship and then set it alight. They wanted to destroy any proof of their being there. These are the ballast stones that were kept in the bottom of the ship that can still be seen today on Pitcairn Island. Now, on Pitcairn Island, under Fletcher Christian, he did the strangest things. He divided the island into 7 parts. 6 parts were kept for European men. Each European man could have 1 wife and one of the 7 parts of the island. The 7th part of the island was given to the Polynesian men and the remaining women. The Polynesian men wasn't happy with this racism at all, and then they decided to attack some of the European men and take their land. The European men fought back and killed some of the Polynesian men, and this went to and fro until most of the men were killed. Fletcher Christian, of course, he went incredibly savage. He started killing more and more of the men to try and protect himself. There were 2 men, though, that stood up to him and eventually killed him. These 2 men were Edward Young and John Adams. John Adams was an orphan that came in from London, and he was taught by his friend Edward Young how to read out of the Bible and the prayer book and the Bounty. So John Adams worked for Edward Young in the kitchen, and that's how they got to know each other very well. And with just these 2 men on the island, and of course lots of women and children at this stage, there was peace. But when Edward Young got really ill and died, um, John Adams was incredibly depressed. So John Adams did the strangest thing. Even though he didn't believe in God, he was so bored that he would start reading the Bible. But the other thing he would do is he would create a bunch of alcohol and he would get drunk every day whilst reading the Bible. So he would drink and read the Bible, drink and read the Bible. And you'd think these two things don't go together. But once, while he was really drunk, he got this vision that actually an archangel came down with a spear and that he would attack him with the spear and that he would pierce him in the heart. John Adams woke up and suddenly realized that he was going the wrong way. He begged God for forgiveness and then turned his whole life around. He got rid of the alcohol and then turned to all these traumatized women and children and said, I'll look after you. He started a school for the children and he started educating them in reading and writing and educating them in the Christian faith. Now, he lasted for 18 years as the leader there, and he created this Christian community. When 18 years later, when they were finally found, Captain Folger of the American whaler Topaz found them, and he said, I found these beautiful people, right? And now, remember, this is 1800s, 1700s. He says, it is a race of noble savages, a race which would have thrilled Rousseau himself. The people were tall, robust, golden-limbed, and good-natured of countenance, so they were very friendly. All were extremely athletic and adept at surfboard riding. These guys were surfing in the 1700s. They had an engaging simplicity based on unquestioning belief in a divine providence. Nobody lied, nobody stole, all worked for the common good. It is one of the great ironies of history that a legacy of mutiny and bloodshed had produced a model community. Now, the descendants of these people are still alive today. There were too many of them on Pitcairn Island, and they were actually moved to Norfolk Island. So if you go and visit Norfolk Island today, you can find descendants of all these people we've mentioned today. Many of them are not Christians today anymore, and some of their values have changed over time. But what can we learn from the story? I think if we think carefully about it, God can change anybody's heart, no matter who you are. And this is what happened to John Adams. Once he turned his life over to God, it was forever changed. And you can imagine the story, the impact that it had on the people in the world at that stage. And even today we can see the evidence of it. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please go and complete the questions on Connect.